What's going on, everyone? Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres, with ScoopDuck on 3, coming to you on Wednesday, May 7th, 2025. And we got another awesome episode of the pod in store for you guys today. So, wherever you're tuned in, we greatly appreciate you being here. Thanks for taking some time to talk some Ducks with us. I got a guest on today's show. It is a longtime friend of the program, and that is none other than Spencer McLaughlin of Locked On Ducks. Spencer, man, how are you?
We are busy, busy worker bees over here, but that's the off season. There's always something to talk about. Always something to discuss.
Whether it's the off season or during the season, I think covering college football definitely does that to you. There's always something to talk about, always a call to make, an interview to do, anything like that. I know you're cranking out a bunch of podcasts, so I'm grateful to get a little bit of your time here to talk some Ducks because it's always a fun time. Kind of my plan for today's show, people can see it here on the ticker if they're watching on YouTube. The way I look at it, this is kind of a big picture thing we're going to tackle here. I think that 2025 is a prove it season for Dan Lanning at Oregon, but I don't mean that in the way that I think a lot of people would probably think it when they read or hear that. We know Dan Lanning's a great coach. We know he can win at Oregon, and we know that he can recruit. It's a rough patch right now, but we know he can recruit. I view 2025 as a prove it season for Dan Lanning because this feels like, Spencer, the season that probably has the most question marks slash unknowns since Lanning's been at Oregon. And this is a roster that is pretty much comprised almost entirely of Dan Lanning's recruits. I think that there's only like there has to be less than 5 recruits left from the Cristobal era. So that's part of the reason I'm so excited to see what the Ducks can do this year, because it's really going to put Lanning and the rest of his coaching staff's ability to develop, to the test. And I think they're going to do a heck of a job.
Yeah, I think that's the right way to approach the prove it angle that you mentioned, because the generalized notion of a prove it season is, all right, you're going to go out and have the best season that you're really capable of. Like, this is a prove it year for James Franklin. This is a prove that you can go make a national championship game. They got to the Final Four, of course, last year, losing to Notre Dame in the final possession. But Penn State is Joel Klatt's preseason, post-spring #1 team in the country. I respect that Joel had the guts to do that, because I'm sure that'll get met with plenty of pushback, because James Franklin, because Penn State, all this stuff, and just like not actually looking at the team and the situation that they have. Like, it's just brand bias. So it's not that for Oregon. There's too much research. I've been beating this drum a lot in the offseason on my show, Max, and that's that I can't have big expectations. I always have big hopes for Oregon, of course. Last year, there were expectations, and until the Rose Bowl, they met them or exceeded them. And last year, I predicted Oregon to go 12-0. They, of course, did. When I saw it was Penn State, I predicted them to win the Big Ten championship game. They did. I wouldn't predict them to do either of those things this year, because there's so much new everywhere you look. Like, everywhere you look. Just think about this. I'm not even going to list every player, but among the players Oregon lost from last year, 3 defensive linemen who were drafted, your quarterback who was the most experienced player in the history of college football, your starting running back and 1,000-yard rusher, and 4 offensive linemen. That'd be a lot if that were all it was. That's not all it is. So I like the angle you came at it from, though, with this being an entirely Dan Lanning defined roster with all his recruits, whether it's multi-year portal guys like Dante Moore or high school recruits that are coming into the fold. I do think there's a prove it element of, hey, prove that you can recruit guys at a high level. Okay, you've done that. Prove you can go out and develop those young guys into high-end players. That's what I think Lanning has the opportunity to fully prove this year, is that when you read about or hear about a recruit on one of our shows or anywhere else you get your news about, hey, Oregon got this highly rated corner, this highly rated defensive back, or this highly rated tight end, quarterback, running back, wherever, right? Whoever you're thinking of on the recruiting trail, that guy has an ability to become an all-conference caliber player with the Ducks, I think is what, you're really looking for from Dan Lanning and the staff this year. And I don't expect that to materialize in a second straight Big Ten title or Oregon's first ever national championship. I do expect it to, given the schedule, result in a college football playoff appearance. And that, I think, is where, there's the prove it mode for Dan Lanning. Like, hey, these are your guys who you put a lot of money into recruiting over the last couple of cycles. Are you capable of getting them out there ready to go and playing to their full potential? And I think their full potential this year is a playoff team that wins a game or two. And next year, that'll be a national championship standard.
And winning that playoff game, I think, is really the next step for Oregon, because you went to the playoff last year, right? You were the number 1 seed, all that. You got the doors blown off you by Ohio State. Yes, things looked better in the second half, but when people think about the Rose Bowl, that's what they're thinking about.
Oregon, it was 34 to nothing.
Show up. Yeah, Oregon didn't show up. I was flabbergasted in that Rose Bowl media box out there in Pasadena. I really couldn't believe what I was watching. Not so much that Ohio State was doing well, but just like, what were we seeing from Oregon? But we don't have to talk too much about that. That's in the rear view. But for Oregon now, coming off of that college football playoff appearance, winning the Big Ten in their first year, I think there's a ton of people out there, Spencer, that are probably looking at this Oregon team, and probably some national college football media pundits in this mix, in this group. And they're saying, well, I still think that the expectation should be to make it back to the conference title game, if not at least making the college football playoff. And I think that shows you how much confidence there is around Oregon. And of course, the guy that's running the show, Dan Lanning, because even though you lose all of these guys, like the expectations that are placed on a program like Oregon, they don't go down, because we see all these big time recruits coming in. We see some of the guys that are getting in the portal, and people are still expecting Oregon to field a hell of a team next year. And I think they will, but the journey to get there, we're still kind of seeing where that's at. And the spring game gave us our best glance so far.
It did. And one of the most simultaneously frequently discussed, but under discussed elements of this team for Dan Lanning in year 4 is the quarterback position. This is the first time Lanning is going to work with an inexperienced quarterback. That's a huge thing for Dan Lanning and Will Stein. And I know Will Stein is the quarterback coach and play caller, of course, but I've pushed back on this kind of generalized notion for a long time. Just because someone's a defensive head coach does not mean he never coaches the quarterback, or that he never talks to him or is a part of his development at all. Yes, Lanning is more defensively focused, and I'm sure he spends more of his time at practice over there. But I hear that from fans or media people all the time. Well, he's a defensive head coach. I'm like, so you think he knows nothing about quarterback? You think he just never talked? You think Dan Lanning and Dylan Gabriel just never talked during a game? You don't think there was ever a conversation, ever? Like at any point in time? No, he's not his play caller. He's still his coach. And so I think that for Lanning and Stein, this is a huge test of a season, because, the development that they did with Bo Nix was incredible. Incredible. I know you see these conversations take place on Twitter, Max, about Oregon and development and all that sort of stuff. And
all the time.
Yeah. For some reason, it feels like a daily occurrence, but everybody else is just mad at Oregon. That's standard operating procedure. So the thing I find interesting about that conversation, because there is an interesting thread in there, why don't transfers count? Like, well, Oregon can't develop players. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. You just going to ignore Bo Nix? Bo Nix was washed out. He had dropped 2 full stars in his 24/7 ranking from high school to when he entered the portal. Auburn fans couldn't wait to run him out of town.
A legacy.
He was a legacy. His dad played at Auburn, and Auburn fans said, get him the hell out of this program. I want someone else at quarterback. And Oregon turned him into the number 12 pick in the draft.
And a Heisman finalist.
And had they been more prepared in the Pac-12 championship game and won, Bo Nix would have won the Heisman. He was the betting favorite. I think he would have won. He had the numbers, and Oregon would have been one of the 4 playoff teams. So to be in that position was pretty darn incredible when you consider where Bo Nix's first 3 years of college football went. But this is still even different than that, Max, because Dante Moore has not started, what did he start, like 4, 5 games in a row at UCLA? I'm pretty sure it was 4 straight games, and he threw a pick 6 in 3 straight, and then Chip Kelly said, yeah, we can't do this, we're trying to win, and that was a mismanaged situation by the Bruins coaching staff at the time, to be sure. I don't think Dante Moore was unsupported there. He's better supported at Oregon. But my point is that you have literally gone from the most experienced players in the history of college football at the quarterback position and making them better versions of themselves to now you have to take a guy who was broken in some ways at his previous stop and make him the best version of himself. That's a big time test for Dan Lanning and Will Stein and the rest of this Oregon staff. And is Dante Moore capable? Yes. Do I like his prospects? Yes, absolutely. But I think that angle shouldn't be ignored when you talk about, what's the coaching staff trying to prove here in 2025, that they can work with a young quarterback who sat for a season and come in and be a good starter and get ready for a potential Heisman run in 2026.
I'm glad you bring up Dante Moore because it also illuminates kind of an interesting dynamic at quarterback, Spencer. I think that you hear people saying, okay, well, Dante Moore was a transfer, so here we go. Oregon back in the portal again for a quarterback. But I don't necessarily view it the same because this was a guy that was committed to Oregon coming out of high school and admitted that he flipped to UCLA because Kenny Dillingham took the ASU job. We know it was a dumpster fire at UCLA the 1 year he was there. So I view this as a much...
I don't know about dumpster fire.
It was rough. I don't think Chip Kelly wanted to be a head coach there during his last season. I don't know if it was the best situation. It certainly wasn't a QB-friendly, fostering growth environment.
It was not a great situation. That's fair to say. But dumpster fire is Colorado pre-Deion Sanders.
And year 1, Deion Sanders.
I mean,
if you see that Oregon game,
they started 3-0. Like they were at least better. But like that's dumpster fire. And by the way, I want to make it very clear. Dante Moore is in a significantly better situation with the coaching staff, the university, and the team around him now than he was at UCLA. I also will, in some ways, defend that UCLA team that won 7 or 8 games with Ethan Garbers at quarterback, who's nothing special. No, I don't think he's even a CFL quarterback or UFL quarterback. Like he's just kind of a guy. So it was not a great situation to be in. Dumpster fire, I think, is too harsh. He had a couple of capable receivers. His offensive line was bad. I think that'll be the biggest upgrade. He had good running backs. He had solid tight end play. Their defense was respectable. But their defense was more than respectable, actually. Their defense was really good. So it was not a good situation for him to be in. But that's another reason, anytime I see someone say, just in a comment or whatever, like, oh, Dante Moore Heisman this year, or, the guys that are leaving Oregon, Tez Johnson, Trayshawn Holden, oh, he's winning the Heisman next year. I'm like, okay, let's pump the brakes on that. I expect him to be good. In 2026, heck, if I could, I'd probably put my own money on Dante Moore to win the Heisman if he comes back, because that situation's going to be, you'd have DeCorian Moore, Jeremiah McClellan, Jurion Dickey might still be there, Gatlin Bear coming in, maybe Kenyon Sadiq comes back for a 4th year, 2nd year starting, then I can get behind it. But for 2025, I expect Dante Moore to be good. I don't expect him yet to be great.
And the quarterback situation, I think, transitions into a broader point that I wanted to discuss on today's show with the prove it angle for Lanning, right? The Ducks didn't take a quarterback in the transfer portal. Great situation. I don't think that many expected them to take a quarterback in the transfer portal, but nonetheless, I think Dan Lanning not taking a quarterback in the transfer portal is a little bit of the, put your money where your mouth is kind of a deal. They took 11 transfers from the portal. but they still enter the season with some question marks and maybe not a ton of experience. I think that the general consensus is that they're going to be leaning on some of these younger guys the most that they probably ever have under Lanning. And I think that is a really exciting dynamic for this team because a lot of schools, sometimes you see them take a whole bunch of transfers. And why are they doing that? I think because they're young, or in some cases, they don't trust the young talent on their roster. And Oregon's got a ton of really good young talent. And I'm really excited to see what like redshirt freshmen can do out there now that they have a bigger opportunity and are going to be called upon more. So I think that that's a tremendous testament to what Lanning has done and the confidence he has in his guys, whether it's quarterback, whether it's linebacker. He was pretty emphatic about that after the spring game, that they're not going to take a linebacker in the portal. The fact that they have a completely intact quarterback room, I mean, I love watching Austin Novosad, Spencer, but most of the conversation in the Oregon football community has been like, is this guy going to transfer? Is this guy going to transfer? Here we are on May 7th after spring ball, and Oregon has Dante Moore and Austin Novosad as the top two guys that are probably going to play a whole lot of football for them. So I didn't want to kind of drown in the quarterback conversation, but I'm really excited to see these young guys, and I bet that Dan Lanning and the rest of his staff have a whole heck of a lot of confidence in them because they didn't go into the portal super heavily or as much as they have in years past.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier, but Dante Moore is not, I don't view him as a transfer quarterback. He is, but when I think transfer quarterback, I'm thinking Bo Nix or Dylan Gabriel. Plug and play, no high school recruitment, no, sitting for a year and developing. Just you're coming in, you're the starting quarterback now. Doesn't mean development doesn't take place, as I mentioned, but the Novosad situation, I'm actually not surprised that he stuck around for this year. I will be surprised if Dante Moore returns, if he stays again next year, because at some point he's just using his eligibility to be a backup quarterback, and based on what we see in the spring game, man, he's way too talented for that. I mean, he looks, and yeah, Ty Thompson was really talented too. Novosad looks significantly better as a quarterback in the opportunities that we've seen. Now, do I want to see more game action before I make a definitive conclusion? Sure. I just think his ball placement is so precise and he looks so good in the pocket. Like, if you just did a no background knowledge assessment of Dante Moore and Austin Novosad in the last two spring games, Max, how big would the gap be?
Not that big. I mean, they both looked really good, looked pretty good in the spring game. I mean, Dante didn't blow it up from a statistical standpoint. I just like Austin Novosad's aggression, like his aggressive nature to push the ball down the field, and he just has a lot of confidence. You can just tell it oozes off of him.
Yeah, I agree with that. So think about this situation. Brian Bennett is forever and always my ideal dream backup quarterback because he came in when Darren Thomas got hurt in 2011 for most of the Arizona State game. That was a top 20 matchup, and Oregon won. He started the Colorado game. There might have been one other game in there as well, like I feel like a Washington State when the Cougars were really bad. He started a handful of games while he was out. I think that hypothetical is why Novosad is still here now, is being the backup quarterback at a big-time school can be an incredible opportunity. Look at Steve Angeli at Notre Dame. He's in his third year of college, or going into his third year of college football, and he is going to likely start for Syracuse. Why? Because he was the backup at Notre Dame, and he was competing for the starting job. He lost that job. But now he goes to a Power 4, and he's probably going to be the start. There is real value in saying, I just spent the last 3 years of my college career, the first 3 years, at Oregon. And if he gets any sort of game experience, well, suddenly he can really push the envelope on here's what my potential is as a starting quarterback, right? I mean, think about Malik Murphy at Texas. Same thing. He's now the starter at Oregon State, by the way. It's a really good pickup for the Beavs. And they gave him like $1.5 million in NIL, and I applaud them for investing in their players like that. So Malik Murphy was at Texas. He started a couple of games when Quinn Ewers got hurt. Quinn Ewers returned, and then he went back to being the backup. But you just put 3 games, pretty sure it's 3 or 4 games of starting SEC experience onto your resume. He parlays that into a starting job at Duke. He then decides, I don't want to be there. Had a great season at Duke, by the way. They won 9 football games. Now he's at Oregon State. So the allure of being a backup at a big-time school has value. Only to an extent, because eventually you want to play. But guys can get dinged up. I mean, if Dante Moore goes down, it's going to be Novosad. As good as Luke Moga looked, I have a hard time believing it would be him over Novosad, and maybe it'd be both of them. I don't know. Vernon Adams got hurt in 2015. We saw Taylor Alley and Jeff Locke. I don't know. You know, like, that was a rough time. that wasn't great. That's also my point, though, of why I'm glad Novosad is there. You never worry about backup quarterbacks are exactly like any type of insurance you have, health, dental, car, whatever. You never think about it until it becomes the most important thing in your life. Braxton Burmeister comes to mind, right?
Oof.
Herbert goes down. Like, Herbert in the games he started was 6-1. Imagine if in the other games Oregon didn't go 1-4 and instead they went 3-2. That season's completely different, right? So I think it makes sense that he's still around, because I think there's value in that. But next year, I think he'd be wasting eligibility if he were to stay with Oregon, because then he'd only have really 1 year to start, right? I mean,
yeah, I think so.
I mean, he's okay with that. Ty Simpson's probably going to start down at Alabama this year. He's a redshirt junior. Novosad's going to be a redshirt sophomore this year, right? Yeah, redshirt sophomore this year. Redshirt, maybe he's willing to wait until he's a redshirt senior to be Oregon's starting quarterback. I don't know. I doubt it, but I don't know. It's an interesting conversation.
The last little point I wanted to get into here, Spencer, on the prove it. I don't know if there is a bigger position that I think Oregon needs to prove it at, or maybe is in a situation where they could prove it at, than linebacker. I think you could obviously look at the question marks in the secondary, and I'll give you that one if you want to bring that to the table. But Bryce Betcher is the most experienced guy that returns in that room. Devin Jackson played a good amount of snaps last year. Didn't see him in the spring game. But Oregon only signed one true linebacker last cycle in Gavin Nix. Maybe he sees the field a bit as a true freshman. Not entirely likely or common for Oregon, but you got 3, I don't know if it's too far to say freakish kind of athletes that are waiting in the wings, in Braden Platt, Kamar Matudi, and Dylan Williams. I saw all those guys in high school when they were coming out as recruits. Braden Platt is a run. Both Braden Platt and Kamar Matudi were like fairly legit running backs. I mean, I think Kamar ran for 1,000 yards as a running back while also playing linebacker his junior year. So those are a bunch of guys that I'm super excited about. And I think with the way the roster is at, Jerry Mixon's another guy that's probably going to be in the mix. I think that there's probably some Duck fans out there that look at linebacker play the past couple of years. And I'm not saying it was poor, but I don't think it was necessarily at the level that they were maybe expecting when you bring over a Dan Lanning from Georgia. Now you have a bunch of guys that are Lanning, Michalowski guys, and I think that thing's looking really good for next season.
Yeah, I love that position group going into this year. I do agree with the secondary point, though. You lose your top 6 guys, like, that's a lot. But does that mean we could see Ife Obadegwu unleashed on other teams' receiving cores? Because, man, that guy looks really good. Dylan Thieneman is a stud. Every other position, I don't know. We'll see. But I love that you bring up the linebackers. I think Jerry Mixon looks like the third guy to me. Like, Betcher and Jackson are your top 2. I like what I've seen from Williams, Mathuti, and Platt. Mixon looked big and fast in the spring game. I mean, I don't think he pushes past either Jackson or Betcher. They're too experienced and too good. But man, I was really impressed with Jerry Mixon. And I liked that they didn't bring in a transfer. I think they could have. You could have easily justified it, because sometimes position groups do need 2 or even 3 years before a guy is really ready to be a high-end contributor. But Jerry Mixon is going into his 3rd year. So I like that they are approaching it that way, and they're giving those young guys a chance to prove what they've got. And I think also we've seen with this Oregon staff, they wouldn't be doing that if they didn't think those guys were ready. I don't think they are ever going to just say, We're going to play young guys because people
We have
on
to. That's all
people in
we
the
have.
YouTube, people in the YouTube, because it's all we have, because we don't have any other options, or because we know that fans want to hear about recruiting stories and all that sort of stuff. That's not why they play young guys. They play young guys because they're ready. I think those guys are clearly ready. At least two of them are going to be key members of the defense. Like Oregon last year played three linebackers a lot and a fourth a little. So you're going to have one linebacker who plays a lot. I think that'll be Mixon, and then one linebacker who plays a little. And then after the season, boy, no Betcher, and you'll have everybody else back potentially, depending on how Devin Jackson does. So yeah, I like that room a lot.
Lots of reinventing and retooling going on in
Yep.
Oregon's 2025 defense. That is my good friend Spencer McLaughlin. You can follow him at SMcLaughlinCFB. You can also listen to him on the Locked On Ducks and Locked On College Football podcasts. If you guys want to find more of me, you can follow me at mtorres sports. Subscribe to the ScoopDuck on 3 YouTube channel. Come and see us at scoopduck.com. Best community for Oregon football. Really, really active message board. And we want to have you guys covered every step of the way for all things football and recruiting. So until next time, thank you guys so much for listening to another episode of the Ducks Dish Podcast.